You got it. You're right. It's the Dragonlance Chronicles. Now, absolutely one of the pillars of fantasy. Now, Dragonlance Chronicles is the first Dragonlance books. And there have been a lot of Dragonlance books. These came out in 1984. Okay, so that's going to be before quite a lot of modern day fantasy readers were even born. I was born in '96, so these were written far before my birth, and these were some of the first fantasy novels I ever read. I picked these up from my dad. He had these, and I inherited them. And when I was a young lad, maybe about 8 or 9, is when I read these. And these were essentially the pillars of my fantasy career. These are, some of the oldest fantasy novels that I still think hold up. And these came out kind of around the peak of people writing down their own D&D stories. So this was 84. Drizzt came a little bit later with R.A. Salvatore in the Forgotten Realms. We had all kinds of stuff like this popping up in the 80s, mid to late 80s, and into the early 90s. And I think Dragonlance did it well, okay? You're going to look online and you're going to see reviews for Dragonlance, and you're going to see things such as generic characters or full of tropes. Things like someone just wrote down their entire D&D campaign. And while there is merit in some of these criticisms, I think that they also are doing a disservice to Weiss and Hickman here, because these guys were so early. 84, okay? 84. That was before so much fantasy was even published. All right, so when we're talking about tropes, you got to remember these guys are one of the first. All right, now I'm not saying they are the first, because I understand they're not. All right, fantasy did have people before them, but I'm saying we didn't have an entire century of fantasy prior. Okay, tropes were still being invented. These things were still new at the time. They weren't overused. It would be like Twilight and the vampire craze. Okay, it was new, it was fresh at the time. People still loved it. So don't be too harsh on these. And I think these are exceptionally good building blocks. Okay, I think these did a lot for us. And really, I think the buddy fantasy D&D kind of style, simple story, camaraderie, fantasy is still fun, and I think it's still excellent to read. Now, it is a simple story. Okay, so if we're going to be talking plot, the story isn't complex. It's not, breaking any ground. It's not traversing into the unknown. This is simple fantasy, simple, fun, lighthearted. Characters are a little generic, okay? So they're going to follow some stereotypes and some archetypes. But that doesn't mean they're boring, okay? We do have some good character development. We do have strong characterization. We do have identifiable characters here. Okay, so these characters are people. They're realized. They're actualized. And it's enjoyable to read about them. This is classic fantasy. Look at this art. Okay, look at this art. Come on. That's classic. That's classic fantasy. What you see on that box there is kind of what you're going to get in the story. Classic fantasy. It's something I love. And I think it's something that Dragonlance did well, at least in this original trilogy. Okay, this is the original 1984 trilogy. There are quite a few that come after that were definitely not as good, but this one is still solid, and I think that it is a fantasy classic that everyone should read. Okay, they're not hard to read. They are simple stories with simple adventures and just fun characters who are banding together to get shit done. Okay, it is. It's just classic. It's just classic, and I think it is a strong foundation of the genre, and I think it's just something that everyone should read. So that is the Fantasy Foundation, and I hope you read the Dragonlance books. Thank you.